We are back today with another video discussing some NHL trade and free agent rumors of things we may see happen during the upcoming offseason. Plus, we also have some more NHL signings to discuss as well. We'll jump into all the latest news coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have another installment here of offseason rumors I want to take a look at today with some trade and free agent scenarios we may see unfold in the coming weeks as we approach the NHL offseason. Clearly, for some of these NHL teams, their seasons will be coming to an end here very shortly, just under a month away. And obviously, the teams battling for the playoffs will extend a little bit further. And there's lots of teams right now that are not secured in a playoff spot and really probably won't know until we come right down to the wire if they're going to be in the playoff push or not. But first off, let's get started with just a few quick items here, some news on NHL signings to discuss. The San Jose Sharks have signed defenseman Radim Simek to a 4-year extension at $2.25 million. He's gotten into about 48 games this year. Of course, the Sharks have traded several defensemen over the last year or so, freeing up cap space mostly, especially after the Erik Karlsson signing took place last offseason. They recently traded Brendan Dillon, of course. So obviously they need some defensemen who can fill in, that 4, 5, 6 spots with some cheaper contracts. He's filled in relatively well so far this year. Obviously, they're pleased with his performance and have rewarded him with a 4-year extension. Of course, he was an undrafted signing by the Sharks just a while back here. So a pretty decent deal for them for their bottom pair. The Detroit Red Wings have also signed Alex Biega to a 1-year, one-way contract as well. So far, he's played 48 games for the Wings this year, and that contract is valued at $875,000. So he'll make that even if he ends up playing in the minors next year. Of course, the one-way deal doesn't guarantee that he will be on an NHL contract playing in the Detroit Red Wings. He could still end up in the minors, but would require waivers, and even if he is demoted down, he would still be paid his NHL salary. Okay. The Edmonton Oilers have signed winger Josh Archibald to a 2-year extension as well at $1.5 million. The Oilers are certainly quite confident in what he's brought to the team this year. They're quite pleased, obviously, with signing him to this extension. Leading into the season, the Oilers certainly lacked depth on the wings, and they've had a few players kind of surprise and fit in well this year. So Archibald, being one of those guys, gets rewarded with a 2-year extension, $1.5 million. Obviously, the budget works for their salary cap situation. When you got guys like McDavid and Draisaitl getting paid the big bucks, you do need some supporting cast like this who can make that kind of money and still contribute offensively. He's got 12 goals so far this year. Very well could end up, between 15 to 17 goals for the season, depending on how he finishes the rest of the season, which is certainly a nice pickup for Edmonton. Like I said, add some extra depth here to the wing position for them. Now let's jump into the offseason trade and free agent rumors that we might see happen here. Now, of course, some of these are kind of tied together with some free agent signings that could lead to teams making trades to free up salary cap space, which is what a lot of these likely could see happen. Now, let's get started with the defending Stanley Cup champions, St. Louis Blues, of course, having another strong season, first place in their division. The Blues definitely going to be a playoff team this year. We'll see if they can defend their Stanley Cup championship, and their captain, Alex Pietrangelo, will be front and center at the free agent market come July 1st, assuming he's not signed by the time we get there. Now, we've had recent news from the NHL at their last GM meetings on a salary cap projection for the upcoming season, which could range between $84 to $88 million. Of course, the NHLPA, as I mentioned before, has what they call an accelerator clause where they can inflict part of that to be bumped up. So it's hard to say exactly where that's going to land once it's finalized. And of course, there's still some revenue numbers that need to be finalized as well. That's just an estimate or a projection. As we saw last year, it ended up coming in about $1.5 million less than what the projection that was given at these same meetings 1 year ago. And that really left a lot of teams scrambling to want to spend right to the cap, especially, had to make some last minute cuts and trades to kind of get cap compliant. So teams are probably going to be a little bit more cautious this year than last year until they have that final hard number. Obviously, they need to have that before they start spending money on new contracts and free agents in the summertime. The NHL was a little slow getting that number finalized last year, so hopefully they can get that number finalized a little sooner this year so teams can kind of plan a little bit better than they were last year. We're not seeing them scramble to make trades and become cap compliant here over the summer as free agency gets underway. But Alex Pietrangelo, as I mentioned, is going to be front and center among the list of top players available, arguably the top defenseman out there. He could be a 2-time Stanley Cup champion if they defend their championship this coming spring. And he's had a remarkable career as captain of the Blues here over the last number of seasons. So clearly he's going to be demanding some big bucks. Many Blues reporters feel that he's likely going to get paid somewhere between $8.5 to $9 if he stays in St. Louis, but there are some that believe he could command $9.5, maybe even closer to $10, should he actually test the market and talk to other teams on July 1st once we reach free agency. Obviously, teams are going to be out there looking to add a big-time right-shot defenseman like him. He brings a lot of leadership experience, a Stanley Cup pedigree, and he's going to be high in demand. So clearly there are teams that might be willing to overpay a little bit to bring him in to benefit from having him on their team. Obviously, this salary cap increase is going to help the Blues in their efforts to retain their captain, but I know many kind of question with the acquisition of Justin Falk and the immediate extension that followed earlier before the season started, as whether or not that could impact the future of Pietrangelo, and I really think it possibly might. It was a bit of a surprising move by GM Doug Armstrong, and we'll see how that plays out as we approach free agency this summer. Now, of course, the St. Louis Blues also have other players that they need to sign. Pietrangelo is not the only guy that's in the mix here. Of course, Sammy Blais needs a new contract here as well as young blue liner Vince Dunn. So, of course, those are not going to be, bigger contracts. They can probably do shorter-term bridge deals with guys like that. They're probably not likely dipping into free agency a whole heck of a lot, I wouldn't think. But the one question that comes up, if they need to free up additional salary cap space, could this be the end of Jake Allen's run with the St. Louis Blues? Now, many people might be questioning and saying, well, Jake Allen's actually had a better year this year, and that's true. He's played much better this year than he did last year. Last year we saw him falter, and Jordan Binnington come in and took over and stole his job as the top number one goaltender of the team. Allen's been playing the role of backup this year. He's played in 23 games, but having that added pressure removed from his shoulders has certainly helped him play a lot better and focus better, and at least in my opinion, his stats this year are much better, where he's put up a .925 save percentage and a 2.2 goals against average. We saw him get a shutout here just a few nights ago. So clearly, Jake Allen's focus in his game is a lot more in order than it used to be. Now, of course, we still have a chunk of the season left and a potential playoff run, so it's hard to say what Binnington and Allen's future both hold for the remainder of this season, but this could be a classic case where you might want to sell high while his value is up right now, because clearly Allen's having a bounce back year. If he gets to play in the playoffs especially and gets any kind of more solid performance under his belt, that really was going to increase his value and likely push what they could get for him as a pretty good return. After this year, he'll have one more year left on his contract, making $4.35 million. He's going to be 30 years old in August, and clearly that's an expensive backup situation where Jordan Binnington is also going to have 1 year left on his contract and be eligible for a contract extension. He's going to be wanting more term and more money to be the Blues starting netminder for the foreseeable future, and it very well could be a time, like I said, even though they might not want to lose Jake Allen, it's an expensive contract to have as your number 2 goaltender, and clearly that could be a cost-cutting move that might bring them some good future returns. There's going to be plenty of teams out there looking for goaltending, especially in a really solid, experienced backup goaltender who can afford their contract much better than the Blues, and he might be the sacrificial lamb to help them keep their captain in the fold for the remainder of his career. So let me know your thoughts on the St. Louis Blues plans for the offseason. Do you think the odds of them signing Pietrangelo are good? And if they needed to cut salary, does it make sense Jake Allen is the most likely choice to be traded? Now let's jump over and take a look at the Vancouver Canucks. Now the Canucks are a team who's not doing overly well here as of late. Of course, if you saw my Stanley Cup playoff prediction video, that's not aging well right now because I did pick the Canucks to win their division. Of course, at the time, that was before Jacob Markstrom got hurt, and things have really changed for the Canucks really ever since. Now, one of the players that they probably would really like to keep in the fold beyond this year is a new acquisition of Tyler Toffoli, who they acquired at the deadline from the Los Angeles Kings. He's fit in quite well, putting up about a point per game, scoring 5 goals with the team already. We still have a month left in the season, so Toffoli really is fit in quite nicely and has been productive, even though it's not quite led to the team success that they were hoping for. But having Jacob Markstrom be out and also be a pending unrestricted free agent, I think has really opened a lot of people's eyes to just how important he is. I mean, we already knew he was having an excellent year, a goaltender who I feel should be at least in the conversation for the Vezina Trophy. I'm not sure he would win, but I think he should be in the conversation at least. And he's proven right now by not playing just how valuable he is to this organization. Thatcher Demko has not been able to get the job done. Of course, they have Louis Domingue as the number 3, and he's faltered as well. And even though the team, for the most part, hasn't played all that poorly, I don't think, they've come up short a number of times since Markstrom has gone down down with injury, and said this is just going to add that much more fuel to the negotiations when Markstrom's camp to show that the Canucks that they really need to pony up to give him the term and money that he's looking for to keep him to be their goaltender of the immediate future at least. Now, a big part of that negotiation is likely also not only going to be money in term, but a no trade clause. Obviously, the Seattle expansion draft's coming up in short order, and he's not going to want to be plucked to the Seattle franchise without having a say in that. So clearly, this is an important negotiation for the Canucks, and of course wanting to retain Tyler Toffoli. But if you look at the Canucks salary cap situation, you got to be scratching your head going, well, how are they going to make this happen? And on top of that, defenseman Chris Tanev also needs a new contract, and I think he's worth at least considering keeping around into the fold as well, but it's not quite clear what their plans are yet on the blue line. The best ways they could accomplish this would be to finally shed themselves of the contract of Louis Eriksson. Now, if you're laughing right now saying that's not going to happen, nobody wants Louis Eriksson, they explored this last year, you know what, you were right, they did explore it, it did not happen, nobody wanted to take that contract on, and you really can't blame them based on how he played previously. But the fact of the matter is, after this season, that contract is going to be a lot more attractive than it used to be. Now, on July the 1st, Louis Eriksson is owed a $3 million signing bonus, and he has 2 more years left on the contract. So going into the actual 2020-21 NHL season, he's only going to be owed $5 million in total salary cash payouts over those 2 seasons once July 1st passes and the Canucks pay that bonus. And his no trade clause also changes from a full no trade to a modified no trades of 15 teams. So there's more teams you can move him to without him waiving or consenting to the deal. So that frees up and opens up a lot more flexibility for Jim Benning to get a deal done. Even though his cap hit is still the same, over $6 million, the cash part is there really for a big saving. So a team who might know they're not going to be in it next year doesn't need the cap space, but might be willing to accept a little bit of a sweetener to take that contract on in exchange for something cheap in return to the Canucks, very well might make a lot of sense for a team to help them out. And I could see that type of deal possibly going down sometime early in the free agency. They'd have to wait till after July 1st, so this would not be like a draft day deal or anything like that. It would probably be something that we've seen, into a little bit into free agency, but teams would have to plan ahead and have discussions ahead of time so they could kind of prepare for that. But there's lots of teams we've seen take bad contracts. Some teams that come to mind might be like the Anaheim Ducks, maybe the Detroit Red Wings, the Ottawa Senators, teams like that. Teams that have lots of space are not expected to be at the top of the standings next year and could certainly hold on to that contract and add something else to their rebuild while helping the Canucks out to get cap space that they need to keep their other core pieces here together. So I do think it's quite possible we will see the Canucks move Louis Eriksson this season and help them retain their starting goaltender and keep Tyler Toffoli in the fold as well. I mean, that might not be the only move they have to make because they do have a lot of salary commitments already, but it would certainly go a long way to helping get that accomplished. Now, next up, I want to take a look at the New York Islanders and Minnesota Wild and a potential big trade we might see, something that was already discussed at the deadline. And there's been further reports to indicate that it's very, very likely to pick up negotiations again once the offseason hits. And that's a trade involving guys like Andrew Ladd and Zach Parise in a bad contract swap, essentially, which moves them out of their current situations and gets them a fresh start here with a new team. Now, the rumored deal before was Minnesota sending Zach Parise to the New York Islanders in exchange for Andrew Ladd and Kiefer Bellows. Now, Kiefer Bellows is a solid prospect that the Wild would have a lot of interest in. Of course, the money part of it is what kind of broke things down and allowed them to not end up getting it done before the deadline passed. Now, clearly, the contracts are not the exact same term. They're not the exact same dollars. So they do have to make some adjustments on salary retentions or sweeteners and that type of thing to kind of even things out as best as they can. But clearly, Zach Parise would like to get a fresh start somewhere. Andrew Ladd would feel the same way. They both apparently agreed to waive their no trade clauses. And so it's up to the GMs to kind of revisit this deal and to actually see if they can get the money part of it sorted out and make this happen sometime into the offseason here. And that's not something that would become as any surprise. Now, if those two players get themselves a fresh start, the New York Islanders are likely going to be busy elsewhere. As we've seen since the deadline, they made some big acquisitions. They traded for defenseman Andy Green. They traded for and signed Jean-Gabriel Pageau to a contract extension. And I'm not really sure you can really blame either player for the falters of the team, but the team has really not won since the deadline and have really struggled and now find themselves on the outside of the playoffs looking in. Now, clearly, they have some games in hand on a team like Columbus, for example, so they can very well battle themselves back into the mix. But after everything the Islanders did at the deadline, if they end up missing the playoffs, that could be a catastrophic failure for them, even though a guy like Pajot could still fit in long-term into their future here. But they gave up a lot to get him. They really showed that they were making an effort to bolster their team ahead of the Stanley Cup playoffs, but it still shows here that this team is lacking scoring, and they still need a big-time scorer who can play with a guy like Matthew Barzal. Now, Matthew Barzal also complicates things because he's a pending RFA, and he's going to be looking for a big-time contract extension this summer, and the Islanders are already tight. Now, there was some rumblings whether or not GM Lou Lamoriello would be going after a top star like a Taylor Hall this offseason, and the talks have certainly been creeping up that they could be an interested party if he reaches UFA status on July the 1st. They were in on Artemi Panarin last offseason during free agency, right up until the very last minute when he signed with the Rangers. It was down to the Islanders, the Rangers, and the Florida Panthers. We heard different reports. At one point, it looked like the Islanders were getting Panarin, but the Rangers sweetened that deal just a little bit, made it a little bit more attractive to go to MSG and to Big Apple, which is ultimately where he landed. And of course, having his former team president from Columbus, John Davidson, jump ship over to the Rangers probably helped as well, having some familiarity. And of course, he likely sold them on the idea of being a Ranger instead. So the Islanders clearly have acknowledged that they need a big-time scorer into their lineup. And if they were looking at doing it with Panarin last year, they would have put them in the same kind of predicament if they went after a guy like Taylor Hall this coming season as well, because they just don't have a lot of salary cap space. They would have to make some trades because clearly, like I said, Barzal is going to eat up a lot of what the remaining cap space is. Plus, they have other guys that need deals as well. He's not the only one. So they likely would end up having to trade some other players to make room. But GM Lou Lamoriello is expected to possibly be quite busy, especially if the Islanders do miss the playoffs. I would expect a little bit more of a shakeup. They've obviously taken a step back if that ends up happening, and I would think Lamoriello could move one of his other core forwards in an effort to bring in a guy like Hall and really bolster this team's offense. But let me know your thoughts down below. What kind of contract do you think Barzal will be commanding from the Islanders, which will directly impact what other moves they're able to make? And if they did go on and go after a guy like Taylor Hall, what kind of trades could they make to free up the necessary space to make it happen? Now, next up, I want to touch on the Boston Bruins. Now, clearly, we saw GM Don Sweeney make some moves at the deadline, and even though he kind of looked like he improved his team, he also managed to save some salary cap space in the process by moving longtime forward David Backes in that contract, which wasn't working out, over to the Anaheim Ducks for a less expensive contract and Andre Kasha. We also saw him make a few other deals as well, but overall, they were a little bit ahead of the game with the salary cap. Plus, like I said, we're expected to see some moderate increases this summer, so he will likely have some decent amount of money to work with. And one of those big time things that he needs to do is try to retain defenseman Torrey Krug, who I know the Bruins are a big fan of and would love to keep in the fold. And he's mentioned before on record that he likely would take a bit of a hometown discount to remain with the Boston Bruins longer term. But what kind of discount that is exactly yet to be determined here. We don't really know exactly what that would be. But the Bruins also have some other tough decisions because they have other contracts to do, including forward Jake DeBrusk, who's going to be getting a very healthy raise. Of course, captain Zdeno Chara likely comes back on another one-year deal, so they have to sign him. They don't have their backup goalie, Nero Halak, retained beyond the current year, so they very well likely bring him back. I think the odds are pretty good, or either way, they got to replace him. There's a contract that has to be done in some capacity. For that, they got Nordstrom as well as a UFA. They could look to retain him or maybe fill his spot with another player. Either way, they have some other tough decisions that they need to make. And Torrey Krug's contract could certainly be tricky to get done. There's some reports that if he does make it to free agency, and if he and the Bruins can't come to terms on a contract, that the two main teams that might be front and center trying to acquire him would be the Montreal Canadiens and the Detroit Red Wings. Of course, two division rivals here of the Bruins. Of course, he's from Michigan, so playing in Detroit might be appealing. Montreal certainly could use a really solid left shot offensive defenseman. He fits the mold exactly, in my opinion at least, what the Montreal Canadiens are missing. I'm not really sure he'd be interested in going there. I can't say with any kind of certainty he would be, but he fits what they need, and it makes sense that they would be interested in talking to him. Whether or not he gives them the time of day and would be willing to discuss a contract now might be completely different, but there's reports out there indicating those two teams would be the teams out there front and center trying to make the acquisition should he hit free agency. But you know what? I really don't think they'd be the only ones. Torrey Krug is a very solid, offensively good puck-moving defenseman. I think there would be all kinds of teams lining up should he and the Boston Bruins not be able to come to a contract and he actually makes it to free agency where he can speak with other teams. But I do think the odds of them retaining him are good. They might have to cut salary in other ways, move out some other players. So I'd love to know what your thoughts are. If the Boston Bruins are going to sign Jake DeBrusk to a big extension and they need to bring back Torrey Krug, what might they move out to make enough salary cap space to accomplish those items? That is all your news updates for today. So of course, as always, I want to know your thoughts and opinions and everything discussed here today. So make sure you leave lots of comments and we can discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. We'll keep you up to date with everything going on around the NHL. Thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you next time.